this episode, we speak to Sean McGuigan-Hart, who is a friend, first of all, someone I've known for years, but he has experience of working within special education in this country, and now he is a football coach, or what they call soccer coach, over in America. And we're going to get his views on everything to do with football, but also the world of SEN from his perspective. What inspired you to get involved in football?
Well, really, it was kind of forced upon me, I think, as a child from my dad. He obviously a big football fan himself, and I think his mission once I was born was to make sure that firstly I enjoyed football, but also I was going to support Celtic, and he succeeded with both because he did brainwash me very early. So as a little kid, just sort of watching a lot of games, kind of always had a ball around my feet, getting sort of dressed up in soccer outfits and whatnot. So, yeah, that kind of was ingrained in me in an early age. And then obviously as I was getting older to play myself, in primary school and obviously high school. So the big thing that got me into it was really my parents at that young age where, they're both big football fanatics. And then obviously I took that and loved the game myself. So, yeah, that's kind of how I got going with it.
What if there's a child listening to this who maybe they don't have the support of their parents? They want to play football because they love it, but their parents saying, no, why don't you try rugby or tennis? What would be your advice to those young people?
That's a good question. Obviously, football is the greatest sport in the world. In football, then, really the parents need to be educated into the reasonings of why and what's beneficial about it. And obviously the social aspects of it are huge. The physical components of it are huge. So really, hopefully, regardless of whether the parent is a rugby fan, a cricket fan, baseball, ultimately, if the kid wants to try a sport, you're hoping that the parent support structure is there for them to at least be able to try it and give it a go.
Yeah. No, that's really good as well that you touched on the fact that sometimes there needs to be a bit of educating happening for the parents as well, and they need to know a little bit more about what's out there. And that's something that the pupils involved with the multi-schools are really trying to push at the moment as well, is making sure that their voice isn't lost. Especially sometimes children with special needs can feel really passionate about something, but parents can speak for them because they feel they need to. So actually hearing your perspective is really interesting. It leads me on to another question, actually, Sean. You said about over there, things will be different to what they are in this country. Have you noticed, you've obviously done a bit of coaching over in England, and if you want to expand on that, then obviously do. What are the main culture differences for you between football in this country and football in America?
This sounds obviously contradictory, but they're very similar but very different at the same time. Okay. So the model over here is very different in terms of the grassroots game, where it is a pay to play model, the same as England. However, the difference in how much each sport is compared to England and America is vastly different. Here you would pay minimum $1,000 a year to play sort of club soccer football. In England, when we played, obviously you would pay like £60, and then it was like your referee fees, which were like £5 a week. So in England, you can play as a kid for £100, £200. Over here, that's just non-existent. So the models are completely different. Now, granted, what I will say is whilst the cost is higher, the facilities are obviously second to none. In England, where it's kind of patchy grass fields and some not the best facilities in the world. Over here, they're top notch. I remember when we obviously went to the Colne Community School and we got that AstroTurf field, which was like a big deal.
Yeah.
Over here, turf fields are like it's no big deal. Just like it's like if you haven't got one, it's like So big difference in facilities which help and obviously that contribute to the cost. I would say it's more organised over here, a lot more organised in terms of the league structure and the referees and how things are done. But at the same time, there are things that I think need to be better. Big thing for me has been the quality of coach, shall we say, with the clubs over here.
Yeah.
Again, in England, I don't think it's much better. I still think it's a lot of volunteers who maybe are just dads or mums who are doing it for the, just for the good of the team and the good of the children.
Yeah.
But you're not paying a premium in England. Whereas over here, if you pay $1,000 minimum for something, I think that the people in charge of said program should be qualified professionals. So, I think there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some big differences, which are good and bad for each country.
Okay, yeah. So that as well, obviously, you've given a generalised overview there of how it may be different. I'm now obviously, because we are in this podcast focusing a bit more on SEN. It's quite a big question because SEN, and we spoke briefly even before we delivered this podcast about how SEN may be seen or how it even may be defined within football. Are there any big differences in the culture and the way that children with disabilities are seen when they play football? And then even further about the pathways for those children?
For me personally, what I've experienced, I wouldn't be able to give a very solid answer in terms of what I've experienced. Obviously, since I've been in America, I've coached hundreds, thousands of kids, and obviously that some of them have had disabilities, whether it be dyslexic, whether they've got a hearing aid, So obviously, it goes back to what I said about having professionals in control of these sort of groups, because we're in a better position to maybe identify that, and obviously then adapt how we are functioning as a coach. Now we're functioning the sessions if we are aware of said disabilities, whereas someone who is just a parent coach, isn't a teacher, they won't accommodate for the different learning styles that they need to present to the players. So so really, obviously when I was in England, I worked in the school of Marketfield, where everyone was kind of aware of everything, and obviously people who worked there knew the challenges that they were going to face, in terms of their lesson structure and everything. What I will say here is that, I have come across some situations or heard of some situations where, players have been in bad situations, mainly because their volunteer coach hasn't got a clue how to function or how to operate within an environment where he has players who've got a learning disability.
So again, would you say that it goes back to educating those volunteers and those trainers to have a level of understanding about SEN?
It's about them getting educated. I think firstly, they need to be educated on how to teach, period, which is a big problem. And then obviously what I've found is, I didn't really get into it a minute ago, but I've been told of situations that it's basically abuse that some of these kids have gone through because. How do
you mean abuse?
I mean, shall we say, sort of verbal abuse, mental abuse, because maybe they don't know that cone's yellow instead of orange, or they don't quite hear what the coach said because of they've got a hearing issue, So I think the big thing has been is I've had parents confused when their kid has been put in them situations, and the coach has just gone to town on these players, and then that kid's left confused, upset, angry, and kind of disillusioned by what's happened. But again, the coach, who the volunteer coach, they're not aware of the situation. They don't quite understand it. So it does come back down to the education piece. Yeah. They don't know what the signs are. They don't know how to deal with these situations, which then causes a massive problem. And I'm sure kids have quit sport, soccer, because of these situations, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, we've got many examples over here of children who come to the multi-schools football club, which we're going to do another podcast about. But we've got children who have come along to that club and have previously gone to what we would call, obviously, mainstream football clubs, and they've been abused. And exactly what you said, Sean, about some of the examples. So I really like what you said, first of all, as well, about how generally it starts with being a good teacher, though. So ultimately, would you say, Sean, that if you are a good soccer coach or football coach, and you obviously have some awareness as well, it shouldn't matter who enters your football club. You should be able to coach them.
Definitely, or at least be able to provide or create an environment that gives them something to take from it, and an environment where they're going to excel, rather than just accommodating for the best players who do understand. I think, yeah, definitely. I think if you're a teacher, or you're a good coach or a professional coach, you're going to be in a good position. That's not to necessarily say you aren't going to make mistakes, but you're definitely in a better position and frame of mind to be able to create those environments that are more beneficial for all of the players, not just players who get it immediately.
Yeah, no, of course. I think that leads us on quite nicely as well. You obviously mentioned about your experience when you came back to England, and you did some work at Marketfield School, which for those listeners that don't know is a special needs school in Essex that caters for children with a wide range of special needs. So when you turn up on day one at Marketfield, Sean, what was in your head? What was you thinking? Because it was your first experience, wasn't it, of working in a special needs school?
Yeah. I was. I would say I was very nervous, excited, and also it was kind of the unknown. I thought I was putting myself in a position of slight vulnerability because, look, I didn't know how it was going to go. But the job, obviously talking with you, understanding, what I was going into, gave me confidence that I would enjoy it. But absolutely, first day I was really nervous, and you don't know how the kids are going to take to you. And obviously the big thing for me is that you want your kids or your players to take to you. And, it's not always instant, but you want to have that relationship, because I don't think if you don't have that relationship, it's not going to work,
100%, yeah,
in any shape or form. So, yeah, I was terrified, but, it was also really excited at the same time.
Do you think part of you was terrified because maybe it's something that we obviously go on about all the time? We don't really hear about SEN when we're in school. We sometimes, there might be a child in our class. I mean, I'll speak from my experience when I was at school. If there was a child in the class who was maybe struggling or slightly quiet or maybe slightly different, I didn't understand why that was. And would you say that if you had a better understanding when you were at school, it maybe would have helped before you went into Marketfield?
Yeah, look, let me clarify. When I say I was terrified, it wasn't because I was going into Marketfields. It was just, I haven't been in a school environment before. So if it had been a mainstream school or Marketfields, it wouldn't have made any difference. It was just I was out of my comfort zone, because on the grass or on the turf fields, I'm in my element. But suddenly now going in a classroom is a different ball game for me. So I've never done that before.
Yeah.
So whilst I'm good with kids outside doing all the sporting stuff, how was I going to be in a classroom was a question mark.
Is there, just on that one, is there anything similar to being on a football pitch and being in the classroom? Anything that you can kind of say, yeah, that's quite similar? I mean, there's obviously things you're not playing football in a classroom, although some kids I'm sure would love to.
Yeah.
Is there anything similar to the way you approach things or the way you do things?
I think you should function in a way that, whether you're in or outdoors, you've got to provide an environment, an atmosphere that is good for all the kids, and obviously a learning environment, whether it be within four walls or outside. So again, you've got to structure everything to the whole class, the whole group, but also you've got to make it exciting, you've got to make it fun, and it's got to be energetic. I think whether you're in or outdoors, you've got to have those qualities. I think more could be done outside, if I'm honest with you. I mean, I know England's not the greatest with the sunshine and everything, but I do think at times we could get the kids out of the classroom. We could do a lot more learning outside. But no, I think you've still got to have the same characteristics whether you're in or outdoors. All right, you don't change how you should teach. That shouldn't be a problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well. You said about the relationships are key. It's something that we go on about all the time, especially at Marketfield, and obviously I would hope lots of other schools as well, that relationships are the key. And you obviously must build some really strong relationships with the players that you coach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, for me, I'm quite a personal person. I like to really get to know every player quickly. get to learn their names, and make them feel comfortable. Because as soon as they're comfortable, you've then got you've got their attention, and then you can start teaching them. You can start working with them. But that for me is always key. As a kid growing up, I put myself back in my shoes as a 10-year-old, as a 12-year-old, and think, okay, what did I like about my soccer? Well, I'm going to say soccer and football, and people are going to be laughing because I say soccer.
Two different countries.
What are my experiences like? And there were some things I really didn't like because I was quite quiet. Believe it or not, I was actually a quiet player.
Was you Sean? Oh yeah, no, actually, yeah, no, I remember you being a bit quiet. Yeah.
As a young player, I was quiet, and I always felt like I got left out of certain conversations with the coaches, or didn't get picked for a team because I was a little bit shy, and that always really angered me, and I think that even went on in secondary school.
Was there any coaches that did inspire you? I mean, that could be someone at school, or it could be kind of outside. Because I know obviously we played football together, didn't we, outside of school?
My two best role models really were James and Greg.
Why?
Because obviously firstly, Greg did a lot for me. Obviously, with my personal situation growing up, my dad was obviously working a lot, so I couldn't get, transportation to practices, to games, and obviously Greg took that upon himself to be able to, take me basically everywhere for the duration I was a player. Yeah. So that for me was incredible. It doesn't sound a lot, but he done this for about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, we've got lots of players who transport is a massive issue for them and actually prevents them from getting to football. Yeah.
And then James, I think he saw immediately, and I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, he saw I was a pretty good player. And instantly, as soon as I went to the first practice session, was like, I want Sean. I want him to join us.
He believed in you.
Yeah. And that wasn't always the case at that age for me, because I felt at secondary school, at the Cone, I felt like, I was left out of that high school football team because I wasn't part of the cool kids. And what I will say is that I think this was later backed up, and I wasn't the only one. I think there was a few players, and they were on the same team as me, and from a club standpoint, when we actually did win in the end, when we won that sort of, I don't know even know what it's called. What was it? Essex.
Essex Cup or something. Played
at Withenow. Yeah. And I can't remember, we played, was it Tendering or something? And we beat them 2-1. And me and a couple of these other sort of players at the time who were not looked at for the first 3 or 4 years of high school played in that final, and we won. So, and I actually scored the winning goal. So I felt James immediately saw my potential and my qualities, whereas other coaches within high school, I felt just for whatever reason did just sort of overlooked me constantly.
I think you've made some really good points there, Sean. Like you said, I think that's reassuring for players who maybe are listening to this podcast. They aren't the loudest, but it sounds like what you're saying is to believe in themselves and then basically to work hard, and eventually there should be a coach, if they're a good enough coach, who will recognise that. Yeah,
and you've got to be, you've got to be careful as well. There's always going to be different groups of players that are put in front of kids in a classroom. You're going to have the very confident ones. You're going to have that middle pack that are in sort of in between, and you're going to have the ones at the other end that are kind of quiet, and they constantly do everything you tell them to do. And it's easy, very easy, to forget about them because they don't give you any issues, good or bad. And your focus is always on the ones who allow this, the ones who cause you problems, good or bad. The ones who constantly do well. It's very easy for that to overtake your thought process, and you forget about these group of players here, and even sometimes in the middle. And like I said, growing up as a player, I found myself, I think, constantly, especially in high school, in that position. So when I'm obviously working with players, I try and obviously make sure I am mentally getting notes on everyone within the group. And obviously this is over a period of time as well. So it's good to be able to work with these kids. I've had some of them now for 3 years.
Yeah. No, I think again, you make some really good points there, and this is where maybe the thing with football and teaching, there is a strong link. And you say about there's always going to be children in the classroom that are going to be loud and outgoing, and maybe push the boundaries a little bit more. And part of our role as teachers is to look at, okay, what's not being met with those children, but likewise to ensure that the children in the class who are doing everything all the time that's by the book, they aren't missed, and they're still getting the education they need. And it's about getting a balance.
Yeah, so the balance has got to be good for everyone, and don't get scared to implement your philosophy and your way of doing things.
We didn't always follow the rule book when we were at school, or certainly when we were on the football pitch. But we're talking about the coaches, and the coaches being able to not just pick out those that are louder than others. So I just wanted to go back to Marketfield, Sean, just to ask you one more bit on that. So obviously you spent some time at the school, and I asked you how it might relate to what you're doing now. But what do you think was maybe the top three biggest things that you took away from your experience at Marketfield School?
Top three, I mean, it was a really good experience. I think I was there 3 or 4 months, but I think the big thing was the impact you had with the kids in such a short space of time. What I mean by impact is obviously you go in every day, do your thing, and you go home. And sometimes as a coach or a teacher, I'm sure you think that was number one, is the relationships I built with the kids. Whilst I knew I was getting on well with them, when I left, and you have some kids really upset and writing you letters, and sometimes it would be kids that, during that period suddenly come out their shell and they're actually really upset that you're leaving. The kids that you thought would be happy that you're leaving are actually the most sad. That for me was a big eye-opener, and obviously something I tried to take with me, because sometimes it can be disheartening as a coach or a teacher when you just feel like players or students they don't have any time for you, they don't respect you.
Just on that, Sean, what impact do you think having good relationships has for their education? Because obviously if you have good relationships with kids, you'd hope that it gives them some sort of benefit. What do you think? I know you were only there for a short period, but do you think it gave them, did it make them feel secure because they knew that there's people who cared about them? What do you think?
I hope it made them feel secure, but also I hope it made them excited to come to school every day. If they weren't already, that, I'm going to see this teacher or that teacher. You want them to come, obviously to learn and and all the rest of it. But if you can make them excited to come and see you as well, and be around different teachers, and they're really excited about it, I think that's massive as well. Because look, we've all had teachers as we grew up, the ones you didn't want to see and ones you did want to see. And
don't worry, I'm not going to get you to name names. So.
No, I won't name any names, but it's you was always more. I think you're always more motivated for those lessons as well. And what I will say is that teachers I liked, I didn't want to let them down. I wanted to get good grades. I really, because obviously I wanted good grades anyway. But when you had a teacher that believed in you and you respected and you had a good relationship with, you felt like you were doing it for them as well.
Yeah.
Whereas teachers that you felt didn't care about you, or you just didn't bond with for whatever reason, for me personally, I went into some of those lessons like it affected my ability to learn.
And that's the thing, Sean. There could be children listening to this podcast that have potentially been excluded from school or being homeschooled, and it could be because they've never found a teacher or an LSA or a staff member who understands them and who builds a relationship with them. So it's really good to hear your perspective, someone who only worked at the school for a few months, but recognized early that relationships are key. And so that is now obviously, you said on the football pitch, you try to be quite personal as well. So do you think you've used some of what you learned at Marketfield to translate onto the football pitch now?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, obviously it's a bit different because at a school you're there for 6-7 hours. So it's like, you're around kids a lot more for a longer duration. So you get to know, you pick up different things and different what works and what doesn't work. And obviously think that I picked up things that I saw from teachers that, certain things that they did that made kids click and got them engaged. And I would constantly make notes of, could that work outside? And, teachers, the way they structured some lessons to get their attention, make a note of that. Could I implement the same thing slightly different outside, So yeah, I think I picked up quite a lot during that period, and obviously I felt like the school had, some pretty good teachers, and watching them, run the show was good for me, because I picked up quite a few things that I've definitely been able to use outside.
Yeah, no, I would echo that. I think I've spent obviously nearly 12 years at Marketfield, and I owe a lot to the staff that I've learned from and picked things up from. So I definitely echo those comments, Sean. Again, there could be some young people that are listening to this who might have aspirations of becoming a coach when they're older, or they may already be a coach. What kind of tips or general advice would you give anyone that wants to become a coach? And what are your thoughts on where they should focus most of their energy?
So I think the first thing I'd recommend is that you go and get your coaching licenses. I feel like it's too easy for a lot of people to just say, "Oh, well, I played football, so that immediately makes me a fantastic teacher and a fantastic coach." It doesn't. So first things first, go and get your coaching badges, whether that be your level 1, your level 2, or the youth modules now, which are really good as well. I spent 8 years, from college to university, and then getting my diplomas and my degree, and then on the side I was doing my coaching badges. Took me 8 years to get all that together.
Did you ever get frustrated in those 8 years and think, "Cool, this is taking a long time, eight blimmin' years"?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of frustrating, because it's a long pathway, and you've definitely got to put the hours in, off the field and on the field, and sometimes you get no money for it as well. So you could be coaching 3 hours a night, and it's volunteer coaching, but you've just got to stick with it. And also the experience you gain from those volunteer hours obviously end up being very crucial. But no, I think you've got to go and get your licenses, put yourself out there, sometimes for zero sort of. And obviously, once you get to a certain point, in terms of your licensing, then you can start applying for some good coaching jobs that are all around the world. And that's the next thing I would say, is that I don't think you should just assign yourself, if you are, an English coach, just to stay in England. I think you should definitely look globally, because there's some very good soccer jobs or football jobs around the world, and good pay as well. And maybe, if you're from England, you go, "Oh, you just got to stay in England." It's very tough to get a good job in the coaching industry in England. Very tough.
Okay, yeah.
So I think you've got to have the ability to be sort of open to the idea of going, across the globe, like kind of what I've done.
A lot of our podcast material will be around the area of special needs. So if there's a child who's listening to this and they may have autism or ADHD, or they may be deaf and have hearing aids, or they may even be visually impaired. They don't want to play football professionally. They just want to go and enjoy their football. But they're scared to, because they think, I'm going to get abused. I'm going to get called names. I don't feel secure. What would be your message to those children, Sean?
And you've got to give it a go. And then obviously, if things are the organisation they're going to go to, if they've got their priorities straight, they should be going in the hands of good people, good teachers and good coaches. So I think, you've got to be brave. Again, you've got to go out there. You've got to put yourself in uncomfortable situations. It's not always going to be with people in terms of friends and family and teachers and coaches. And you've got to put yourself out there in vulnerable at times situations. And I think that when you do this, you do gain a lot from it. In so many different angles, you gain so much from it. That would be my advice. Be brave, go out, give it a try. And like I said, you will know if it's right or not, and it's cliche, but until you try something, how can you say I didn't enjoy it, or it's not for me?
And if it's not right, don't just take it.
Well,
do something about it.
Here's an example from my perspective, and you're going to laugh your head off. Rugby. You guys wanted me to play rugby for years, and I had no interest in rugby, no interest.
No.
What did I do? I gave it a go, didn't I?
Yeah, you did. You
I
did. You
tried
might have thrown the ball forwards,
Yeah.
but you still
My
gave it a go.
first bit of playing rugby was to throw the ball forward, which I had no idea you couldn't do. I know I was, hey, I'm not no interest.
Yeah.
It wasn't really anyone's fault. I think the rules could have been explained to me a bit. I'd gone in there, had no idea. I still don't know the rules of rugby. I'll be honest.
It comes back to better coaching and better awareness and understanding before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Look, I gave it a go because so many people said, "Oh, you'll be good at it. You'll enjoy it." And I thought, okay, let's give it a go. I gave it a go. It was a nightmare. I wanted the ground to swallow me up when that incident happened, and I went, right, I'm not doing rugby again. But I gave it a go, and haven't played since.
Well, you'll be pleased to know, Sean, I've written you down to do a podcast all about rugby coaching next.
Mate,
so,
I will succeed in that.
You can talk about it, just not play it.
Yeah, I know all the rules. Would be a great coach of rugby. No, but that for me is a good example. Is that people said, look, give it a go. It's good. It's and I think for us at sort of 15, 16, it's a great way to get your anger out and your aggression. Because it's a very physical sport, and it just wasn't for me.
Yeah. Put some really strong messages in there about just going and giving things a go. And I hope if there are some young people who are listening to this podcast, you can take Sean's words about transition, about going and playing football, about coaching, and about his experience in Marketfield and go and do something about it. If you've listened to this podcast and you've got any questions that you'd like myself to ask Sean about, any more detail about anything that he's mentioned, then my email address is mschoolcouncil@gmail.com, and you can email me there. So thanks very much, Sean.
Everyone, so let's start today.